All right. So last week we worked through learning a little bit more about Dr. Michael Greger's red light foods, which are part of the traffic light system. And of course, to get the full education on this, you can go and try to get a copy of Dr. Greger's book, How Not to Die, which you can normally pick up at the library or you can grab it on Amazon or somewhere on the internet. There's also a lot of his video content on YouTube, which does go deeper into this. Dr. Greger, among probably a half dozen or so other prominent lifestyle doctors, will be a big part of the content in this course. We've taken from them many of their most important teachings and use that to help construct a program that will give all of our clients the best education in the most concise way possible to learn how to do this stuff the rest of your life. So today we are going to go a little deeper into the entire traffic light system, where we talked more about the red light foods on the last content. This one will go deeper into green, yellow, and we'll talk a little bit more about red. So first of all, the traffic light system is a way of looking at food to determine whether the food is health promoting or disease promoting or somewhere kind of in the middle. And of course, the green light foods will be completely health promoting, which means the more of them that you eat, the more positive benefit your body receives. The red light foods will be disease promoting, which means somebody walking in the room, the more of them that you eat, the more that your body will be at risk for disease. And yellow light foods will have a little bit of both. So they'll have some benefits and then they'll have a downside. And the way that I explain the yellow light foods normally is that they usually favor closer to the red, meaning they're best avoided. But in some cases, they might favor closer to the green. So they're a little bit more case by case. An example of that would be something like tofu. Tofu is a yellow light food because it's not a completely whole food, which of course I'll get into the definitions more, but tofu definitely leans more toward green. There's no reason that you would ever really want to avoid tofu other than the fact that it might be a little more calorically dense than some other things if you're trying to lose weight. But it's very minimally processed, so that would be an example of a yellow that is closer to a green. So there are some cases there. And that's where having some access to working with your coach is going to benefit you, because there's always going to be those questions about, well, how much of this or how much of that. So we'll talk more about that. So now let's define the actual traffic lights. So green light foods, again, they're going to be foods that are completely health promoting. And categorically, we're talking about whole plant foods. So foods that are whole food, they've not been altered. There's been nothing good that's been taken away from them in the processing, and there's been nothing bad that's been added to them in processing. So they're whole foods and they're plant-based. So those categories would include intact grains, vegetables, fruits, legumes, nuts and seeds, mushrooms, herbs, and spices. So I'll repeat that again. Intact grains. Some examples would include oatmeal, barley, millet, spelt, quinoa, brown rice. Vegetables of all types, fruits of all types, legumes. So we're talking about black beans, pinto beans, chickpeas, lentils, and others. Nuts and seeds. So almonds, cashews, pecans, and others. And also seeds like pumpkin seeds or sunflower seeds or flax seeds. And then mushrooms, herbs, and spices. And most herbs are very healthy in nature. Many are filled with antioxidants and help with reducing inflammation in the body. Obviously, turmeric is one of the big ones you've probably heard of. So all of those are green light foods. Now, the interesting thing about them is most of them can be consumed in a very minimalist way. For instance, you could have a plate of organic brown rice alongside some black beans and maybe a handful of almonds or something along with that, and then maybe a banana for dessert. That would be an example of a total green light, pretty minimalist sort of meal. But you can also make very complicated meals out of all of those ingredients. In fact, a big part of what we teach is that you can make virtually any meal you would ever want into all green light ingredients. But I don't want to get ahead, so we won't get too deep into that now. Okay, now yellow light foods. So yellow light foods are minimally processed plant-based foods and unprocessed animal foods of some types. So specifically, when it comes to the animal foods, we're talking about poultry, fish, and really those are the main ones. You might say bison could be in there as well, but largely any type of red meat and certainly processed meats of any type and pork are all going to fall into the red light, which we'll talk about more in a minute. So mainly poultry and fish would be the unprocessed animal foods that go into yellow. And then the minimally or gently processed plant-based foods that are in yellow, some examples would be whole grain pasta, chickpea pasta, see, tofu, soy milk, almond milk. So those are some things. There's a lot that would fall into that. Some types of breads like sprouted bread, actually technically sprouted bread would be green light because it's completely, or it's been taken through a bit of a process, but it's not processed. So really a sprouted bread, like an Ezekiel bread, would really be a green light. Although it's kind of arguable because you wouldn't want to eat even that, you wouldn't want to have tons and tons of it, to where if you had tons of, say, brown rice, that would be acceptable. So there are some nuances here, you might say, but again, something like a sprouted bread for the most part is green light. So when we would say a yellow light bread, we would talk about maybe a 100% whole grain bread that only has whole food ingredients. So again, it's been processed because it's, you don't find grains in the wild that are grown as bread, but it's been very minimally processed because they've not added chemicals and seed oils and all sorts of other junk into it. So with the yellow, the best thing is as you're getting familiar, as you're grocery shopping and you're trying to look at things and identify whether it's yellow or red, because usually that's where people pretty much, after a little bit of training on that, most people can differentiate that something is not going to be green, because it's very easy to define, like green is only whole foods. Foods that have not been nothing, basically one ingredient foods are whole foods, and those are green. But sometimes folks have a difficult time figuring out, well, is this yellow because it only has a few ingredients, or is it red? And again, yellow light foods are normally going to have less than half a dozen ingredients. So if you see something that's got 10 or 15 ingredients, it's probably red light. That means that means it's been ultra processed. Okay, so that's your yellow light foods. Again, minimally processed plant-based foods and totally unprocessed animal foods, mainly poultry and fish. And so if it's an animal food and it's had nitrates or some type of preservative that's been added to it, then it's not yellow, it's red. So to get your yellow light animal food, you're going to need to specifically talk to wherever you get your meat from and make sure that this is organic, totally unprocessed meat. And some folks go to farmers markets for that, and there's plenty of stores around where you should be able to source that as well. And you can't be too careful, because when you get into processing of any type of animal food, it becomes a group 1 carcinogen that is directly linked to colon cancer. So that's one of the bigger reasons to avoid processed meat as the majority of your diet. If you have something once a month, it's probably not going to determine too much, but any more than that, and you start to become very at risk, especially if it's like a weekly or daily thing. All right, now red light, to review that again, red light food is going to be any ultra processed plant-based food, and it's going to be any level of processing when it comes to animal-based foods. And also that includes oil of all types. And we'll talk about that and the differences in quality of oil. But all types of oil, even the better oils, quote unquote, are still red light. And I'll explain why. So, ultra processed plant foods, these are going to be foods that are unrecognizable to nature. So, many ingredients, and we're usually talking about snack foods, chips, candy, cookies, crackers, all of those things. Any of that kind of food is ultra processed. Doritos and Cheetos and all of that. There's even a lot of things that are marketed as healthy that are still ultra processed. So that's where you have to be aware of what's going on with the ingredients. And we'll do a lot of teaching through this course on actual ingredients. But like I said, if you look at things on there and they have chemical names, and if there's more than a few ingredients, then it's probably red light. Okay, so because we should only be eating food that came from nature, right? And up to maybe 75 years ago, that's all anybody ever ate. So all of our ancestors were eating food that you had to grow from the ground or else animal products that came directly from an animal without tampering. And it's only in recent decades that we've been exposed to hundreds of chemicals and genetic processing of foods and all kinds of other things that really have made us into laboratory experiments. And a lot of times, we growing up, I remember the first time I learned that scientists do experiments on animals. And I was like, wow, that's bizarre and maybe a little bit, I don't know, gross, I guess was the word I'm looking for, maybe a little bit offensive, something like that. But then I learned about it. I'm like, well, okay, they're curing cancer and they're fighting disease. And, the only way to do that is they have to test on these animals. And so you justify that because you think that's the way it goes. But then, of course, you learn that it's not just pharma and it's not just like the medical world, it's also the cosmetic world and many other industries. And if you really want to go down a rabbit hole, if you haven't already looked into this in your life, you could type into Google vivisection, which I don't know if I can spell it. I think it's Vivisection, but if you spell it like that, you'll probably, even if that's the wrong spelling, you'll get a spell check and you can look it up. But this is experimentation on animals. And again, perhaps we could all agree with some reasonable level that has to be done because, obviously we do want to cure cancer and such. But the more you look into it, the more you realize this is being done all over the place, not just for these ethical reasons. And it seems that philosophically, it's only a matter of time when you start to exploit other creatures this way that the line between ethics and what is going on with human health starts to get blurry as well. And so perhaps that's what's happened, or maybe it's not, but either way, there's really there's no justifiable excuse for what's gone on not only in pharma, but in our food supply since 1980 something, early 90s. We've all been really taken advantage of and marketed to from a young age, all of these chemicals and cancer causing inflammatory ingredients. And so the beautiful part about this traffic light system is that if you stick with green light foods, and especially if you're purchasing organic foods, you won't be a part of that experiment anymore. So the red light food is going to be ultra processed plant food and processed animal food. And to the oils for a second, because people ask about oils. They say, well, what about olive oil? What about coconut or avocado oil? Because if you've been on the internet for years, you've probably read somewhere or saw somewhere that these are good for you. And so I'll make this really easy to understand. Are there healthy components to some oils if they're from a plant source in terms of do the plant ingredients that are the origin of the oils, do they have vitamins and minerals and things in them and healthy macronutrients like avocados or olives? Yes. The problem is when you take away all of the fiber and when you get rid of everything in that original food, like say an avocado, then all that you're left with is a liquid fat. And liquid fat, because of its caloric density and the extraction process, will be inflammatory to your body, even though an avocado is very healthy to you, when you extract all of the other ingredients and get rid of them, very similar, by the way, to juice. If you have an apple and you eat the apple, it's great for you. The fiber in the apple offsets the fructose so that you won't get the insulin problem from that. And studies have shown you can eat just about as much fruit as you want without having any problems from blood sugar standpoint with fruit. Fruit is it's nature's dessert. It's one of the healthiest things we can eat. But if you get rid of the pulp or the fiber of the fruit and you just drink the juice of an apple, then it becomes a problem. It's in many ways, other than, of course, the vitamins and stuff that are still there, which are good for you. From a sugar standpoint, it's hardly any different than if you were just drinking soda, because your body's gonna have the same reaction that it would to an added sugar in a processed drink. So very similar with oil. An avocado is very good for you. An olive is very good for you. But when you extract the liquid fat, what you're left with is again, an inflammatory oil, but also you're left with the most calorically dense thing that is usually in our diets. And it can be thousands of calories per pound. And it only takes a very small amount on your plate or as an ingredient in your food to tremendously add to the caloric intake from that meal. And it's almost so much that if you wanted to gain weight, if somebody just wanted to gain weight at all costs, probably the best thing they could do would just be to pour oil on top of their, some people would say, oh, eat scoops of peanut butter, because that's also pretty calorically dense compared to other things. But oil is even more. Oil might be, if I remember correctly, it's close to twice as calorically dense as even nut butters, which are very, 2,500 calories a pound or so, very calorically dense. And we'll talk about caloric density in another training, but that's one thing is with our green light food, we are getting food that is all very nutrient dense and very low in calories. And with our yellow and even more with our red light, we're getting food that has virtually no nutrients benefits to the body whatsoever and tremendous amounts of caloric density. And this is why Americans are fat and sick and miserable. So oil, best avoided. Now, what's the best oil? Probably, well, the best oil is definitely flaxseed oil. The problem is it has a low boiling point, so you can't really cook with it. You can add it to salads. And I've heard some of the lifestyle medicine physicians that have done deeper dives into this stuff. They'll say that flaxseed oil could basically be considered a yellow light. It's the only oil that's not in the green light. So it's got a lot of health benefits, but again, still less is more. Next up would be olive oil. Extra virgin olive oil would be the best of those. So if you ever had to use oil in something, that would be the one to use. But again, less is more, small amounts. Olive oil is much less inflammatory than many of the other ones. Once you get past that, it's really kind of pointless to talk about because they're all bad for you. Of course, the worst are going to be the genetically modified chemical oils, the seed oils, so canola oil, safflower oil, sunflower oil, cottonseed oil, rapeseed oil. These are all just straight disgusting, and you don't want them in your diet ever, no matter what. So stay away from the junk food at the grocery store, and especially like the cheap junk food at gas stations. That's the worst of the worst. So that's the deal with oils. Eat the whole food. So eat the apple, don't drink the apple juice. Eat the olive or the avocado or the walnut. Don't have the oil. And a big, usually the follow-up question on this is, what about cooking? What about baking? And there will be lots of content to help you with that. Your coach can help you with that. But let's just say that for our family, we've been 95% oil-free for many years now, and we have no problem making all sorts of elaborate meals. There's nothing you can't make without oil just as good. Even popcorn, freshly popped popcorn, you don't have to put oil on. And occasionally, I said 95% oil-free. Occasionally, we'll do a teeny bit, like literally like a teaspoon or something of olive oil when we make popcorn. But, we make a huge batch, so it's barely any. And, but yeah, even that, it's not gonna be quite as crunchy, but even popcorn you can make without any oil. And then it's actually really, good for you, the popcorn, especially if you don't over salt it. So, but I could go down many rabbit holes with that. I'll leave it there. So red light is food you want to keep out of your diet as much as possible. For long-term health, 2 to 5% of your diet should be red light or less if you want to go no red light ever. But especially as you begin this lifestyle change, you need to discipline yourself to remove it completely so that any level of cope that you have that involves these junk foods, coping with, anxiety or depression or anything, a lot of times food can be a major mechanism, or any just general sort of food dependency, food addiction habits that you have of grabbing this or that when you walk into the house. We are creatures of habit, and you've got to get red light out of your diet for that reason so that it's no longer habitual. And then if you're somebody who, let's say, doesn't struggle much at all with those sort of things, that you can be very low in neuroticism and very disciplined, then maybe again you bring something back into your diet on a very planned level occasionally if you want. But remember, when you eat red light, you're eating it purely for pleasure. There's no health benefit, and there's certainly many health concerns there. So why not? And this is what we try to do in our family. Why not make something that would usually be red light and make a green light version, or at least a mix of green and yellow light version? And that way you get to have your cake and eat it too, which is a nice thing. So the 5%, 2 to 5% red, and then recommendation would be somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 15% yellow, and the rest, which should be largely 80 to 85%, should be green light. And so a diet where the vast majority, as much as 90% of your food is coming from whole food sources, and why not 100%, right? But let's just say 90%, you will see such tremendous improvements in your health that your doctor will not know who you are. They'll think you switch blood work with somebody else. And, of course, there are cases where people, even with the perfect diet, they're still going to get sick. These are inevitable aspects of genetics and life, and sort of just a way that life is. It's unpredictable. But the many studies over the years have shown that somewhere over 50%, maybe as much as 75% of our health outcome is from lifestyle choices. And so you stick with green light food, every part of your health improves. You're fighting all the diseases, your skin looks younger, your energy levels improve, your digestive health and gut health will get so much better compared to what most Americans who struggle with so many issues of the gut, and also anxiety and depression and everything related to gut health. So green light food is where it's at, and we will spend a lot of time during your coaching program and during all of the content talking about how we can implement as much of this green light food into the diet as possible. All right, so I'll see you on the next training video.